What is up, you guys? This is JP, and today's video is going to be about science versus experience. So for those of you who have followed YouTube fitness over the years, I can't remember exactly when YouTube launched, maybe around 2005, 2006. Fitness has come a long way since then. Exercise science research has come a long way. Practice has come a long way. I would say, early 2000s, mid 2000s, and every time before that was, the fitness industry was filled with a lot of bro science. A lot of things that just were not backed by solid evidence. And as exercise science grows as a field and, the research is currently coming out, every single month we get new exercise science research coming out. A lot of you guys may have watched Def Nippard's channel. He talks about the mass research review. You have the strength and conditioning research review. You have so many different research reviews that go over the latest exercise science research. More and more people would look to research instead of looking at actual experience or what people actually do in the gym. They would look towards studies and knowledge, and people would, look to that more than they would, the person who wasn't referencing some solid research. And then that has got to the point where it's become so huge that you have a very large evidence-based fitness community now where people are just really big on research, and there are a lot of good people in this YouTube section who are pushing that forward. But again, like I mentioned a little bit ago, it's a pendulum, because when you have these people who are it's all about experience and what works for me and what I can actually implement to my clients, then you have some people who are like, well, if you don't have the evidence for that, then I'm not going to believe you. And then you have people who are kind of they kind of bridge that gap where there's a very happy middle between the two. They'll combine the latest exercise science research and they'll look at the research, look at the hierarchy of evidence. I'm not going to go over all the hierarchy of evidence, but you have weaker forms of evidence at the bottom of the totem pole, and then you have stronger forms of evidence at the top of the totem pole, like systematic reviews and meta-analyses, those at the top. So in this hierarchy of evidence, you have people who can look at that, say, look at the good evidence, and kind of pick and choose what applies to them, where to apply that knowledge, and bridge that gap with what actually works for them. And then they take what works for them, what they learned in actual practice, they combine it with the research, and then they put that together and kind of morph it to what the client wants and needs. And this is the true definition of being evidence-based for evidence-based coaching. So a lot of people tend to have this negative view of evidence-based coaching, and they say that evidence-based coaching is kind of, oh, that's for the nerds, it doesn't matter. And but when people look at the definition of evidence-based coaching is, it's all about all evidence. It's not just evidence from science. People forget that when you're doing your own workouts and when you're training people and you're gathering evidence from that, those are technically kind of like case studies. You're looking at one individual and you're kind of taking information about that. Now, obviously, you can't take the one individual and apply whatever works for them to everybody, because again, a case study would be on the lower end or the bottom of the totem pole in that hierarchy of evidence. But a good evidence-based coach will kind of combine all these things, and that's truly what you want to be as a coach. You don't want to be on either end of the spectrum. Even though the title of this video is Science versus Experience, a good evidence-based coach will kind of combine those. And you kind of have to look at each of them individually and look at their pros and cons. Like, for example, with experience and practice, it's always going to be ahead of the science. Science is always behind experience. When you're doing things in the gym and you're trying different things and things become popular and they start gaining momentum behind them, that's when researchers and people conducting studies start getting ideas to run studies on those. They say, oh wow, a lot of people says this works because they do it in the gym, so then they run a study on it. But then when they run one study, was it a good study? Was it a study that covers what type of population? What if it was a good study, but it was a study that covered older females? you can't take a study that covers older females and apply it to young males in college that play sports. Now you might be able to draw some conclusions from them, but you have to be careful of drawing the evidence and applying it to all these other populations. So that's one good thing from actual practice or having experience, is you're always going to be ahead of the curve of science, you know? So that's one good thing of that science is always going to be behind, you know? Two, you have to understand that with science, there's always not going to be evidence for something. So in lack of evidence, or in the face of absence of evidence, you have to make a decision sometimes. You have to understand is there's not going to be a study that's going to cover every single little tiny foot width on a squat, for example. You're not going to have a study that's going to have toes facing forward, a little bit wider, a little bit wider, a little bit wider, toes close, or feet close with toes slightly pointed out, and all these different foot variations. Yeah, you might have a study that covers a couple, but not all of them. So there's going to be so many instances where you're thinking, okay, well, what do I do in the lack of evidence? And that's where you're gonna have to draw on your personal experience and what you're actually doing in the gym. So when it comes to experience, it has benefits in that way. But then you also have to look at science. If there's a very strong form of evidence of something, and for example, if there's a meta-analysis on rest periods, for example, that says, you know, greater than 1 minute rest periods are superior for hypertrophy, and you're over here saying, you know, I like 30-second rest periods because they work for me, and then you're saying because they work for you, you're now applying that to all your clients. When, what if you have some clients who are like, I don't really care about my workout length. I'll work out for an hour and a half if I have to. I just want to get the best gains. And you're giving them the 30-second rest periods when there's strong evidence that talks about 1 minute rest periods. And that was just an example. I don't know if they have a meta-analysis on that. I know they do have studies on that. But in that example, you can't take your own case study and apply it to all your people or all your clients. So that's one way science would be better, in the sense that there's really strong data saying something, which are actual people, and you're now ignoring that data in face of, you know, just your personal opinion. And again, there's a million instances I could run there. You know, you have to look at the type of data too. If it's a meta-analysis, really well done meta-analysis, then of course that's very strong evidence. But if your personal opinion is 30-second rest periods and there's 1 week study that's going against it, you might say, well, that's not a really good study and my experience says otherwise. Alec and Curie had a really good point on his channel, was that, you know, all studies kind of start from bro science in a sense. You know, it doesn't have evidence, and then they start to get momentum, and then scientists run studies on those things. So just be careful when you're jumping ship to either way. You know, I used to be a person who was a little bit too much more science, and over these last 2, 3, 4, 5 years, I've realized that there's a lot to learn from personal experience that science cannot teach us. And then you have to think about what the client wants and needs, and then your wants and needs as well. Sometimes that doesn't match up with science. But at the same time, you have to be careful with you know, your own personal experience too. Sometimes you can draw good conclusions from what you learn in the gym, but sometimes you have to be careful if it goes directly against strong form of science, because you might not be, you know, getting the best gains, or you might hurt yourself in the long run. And one last note that I've seen people talk about, and this is one of the strongest opinions I think people have when they're going against science. The thing is, people don't realize making gains and making progress is not a black or white thing. It's not you make progress or you don't. There are different levels of progress that you can make. You can gain some muscle, but then you might be able to gain more muscle. You can get stronger, but you might be able to get even stronger if you were to look at, you know, a study or something. Using the rest period example, if you're going to take a beginner and you're going to have them do squats and you have them rest 45 seconds in between sets, and let's just say they're a beginner, they're gonna get stronger on squats. And now you could say, well, I don't want to listen to this study that talks about longer rest periods for strength because my guy's getting stronger at squats. But I can absolutely guarantee you that if they took 2 to 3 minute rest periods, they would get stronger on those squats. They would get better skilled at those squats. So that's just an example. So when you say something works for me, you have to be careful with that, because you could be making better progress if you were to look at the actual evidence. If you guys have any questions, comments, leave them down below. Sorry about the long video. I appreciate it. See you guys next time. Peace.